So the topic originally started from having worked on a contribution for a book, Corporate Social Responsibility. The article basically say, I don't know, it had been sent around at the time, basically saying to talk about corporate social responsibility is a little bit silly thing. Because actually, I'll come back later to it, there is a business purpose, as Friedman actually says, and this is not about being socially responsible, but this is about making profit. So, anyway, this was one part, background of saying we should start talking about this. There had been, in the meantime, a couple of things coming up, not least Facebook, Mr. Zuckerberg in Washington and in Brussels, going to these hearings because of the scandal around data and data not being protected. Actually, this is just the tip of an iceberg. If you go through it on the internet, there are permanent scandals and there are permanent proceedings, not of this publicity, but at least it is about a permanently going on issue. Then there is another issue when we talk about big data, that is working conditions of those working in this area, sharing economy, gig economy, and all this. The working conditions are not about sharing, they are not about freedom and flexibility for those who work there, but it is just the opposite. So again, we have a misleading term, and then we have, of course, new communities, as Zuckerberg actually mentioned them. New communities we can link up to everybody around the world. It's a great thing. And we enjoy, to a different extent, this flexibility and the self-determination we have with these means. Now we have to work, or try to work, within this tension. And I don't know who looked at the document I sent around. I take a rather broad, unusual approach to this. There's Mr. Ray Kurzweil in German. He is German, actually, he has a German background. Talking about the singularity isn't here. That's the title of his latest book, I think. Which basically means it's all the same anyway. It doesn't matter, there's no difference. His approach, singularity, is between biology and machines. So basically moving human beings as biological beings towards machines, replacing everything. There's no brain left, there's no nothing left. Singularity. It's a weird idea. As weird as the idea of Mr. Rifkin, for instance, the second book I mentioned, The Zero Marginal Cost Society. It's all the same, and it doesn't cost anything. Isn't that amazing? We get everything for free, nearly for free. Coming back to Kurzweil, quoting, my recent computer provides 2,000 MIPS, whatever it is, of processing at a cost that is about 224 lower than that of the computer I used in 1967. That's 24 doublings in 37 years, or about 1.5 months per doubling. It doesn't cost anything. If you look at these dimensions, and if you go further, what you pay, sure, quite a lot of money for your computer, it is nothing if you look at it in this perspective. And then I was tempted to show slides. You have Amazon with this beautiful Amazon smile, which is basically about 0-hour contracts. Why do I say 0-hour contracts? Because we are all good doers. We smile, we provide, even going shopping, we do good. This is the idea behind Amazon Smile, that with every act of shopping, you make a donation, and you are good. And this is what Mr. Facebook, yes, Mr. Zuckerberg, actually, he's so sweet, what he claims. It is an idealistic and optimistic company. This is what Mr. Gates claims and does, and many of them do. They have these huge philanthropic organizations, foundations. I don't want to bore you with the economic side. They make actually money by giving, by setting up these donations. But that's a different thing. At least they do something good. I quoted Hamlet, "The time is out of joint. Accursed spite that ever I was born to set it right." There's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So we have to deal with these tensions of different sides, what I said in the beginning, and try to make sense out of it in terms of societal development. With huge consequences, I'll come back to this at the end, as well for law. What are they doing if we look at the main actors? Main actors, GAFA and BAT. Still have to look it up. It's Google, Apple, Amazon, and Facebook, standing for GAFA. And it is Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent in the Chinese world. So we have a huge competition on the world level, and we think it is clear what they are doing. Google search engine fooling us with algorithms and suggesting what we actually don't want, what we are not looking for, but guiding us. You can go to Amazon as well. Even before you think you want to buy something, you have it at your doorstep. But in actual fact, it is not as easy as that, in my opinion. Of course, you see these kind of businesses, but then you see as well a huge competition, not between enterprises, not between regions as Asia and whatever it is, the West, United States and Europe, GAFA and BAT. But what you find is a huge competition that is concerned with markets, with an economy that actually looks for new ways to shape the world. We have migration issues. We don't know where to go with it. We have the so-called Brazilianization, where we have the singularity of working conditions and of societal splits. Very rich people now as well in the previously developing world. Very poor people now in the rich countries. And it's not only about poor people, but it is about structures. Health system, educational system, childcare, wherever you go. And then you have these super rich people where they have assets we can't even imagine. If you look at Zuckerberg, if they give away 99% of their assets, they are still very rich. Probably richer than we are together. These are dimensions we have to try to imagine, and this is about property. There we come to a legal issue. How is property defined? And of course, it is defined by law, but it is defined in a wider context in terms of philosophical issues or the understanding of society. So what we have there is property in terms of what is manageable, what people are able to deal with. Look, it is not just about property, but it is that part of property they can manage. And you have actually in history as well related issues that it was not allowed to have more in the gold digging in the United States, what is today the United States. You had not been allowed to own more than you could actually manage. There was a limit set to it. An interesting concept. I don't know if Mr. Zuckerberg or Mr. Gates still can manage what they own. Anyway, this is the one thing. The Sherman Act, Antitrust Act, was then in the 1890s coming up and arguing against the facts as antitrust legislation, saying we are moving away from what people can actually deal with. They own so much that they own society. This was basically the sense, the point Sherman made. If you read the congressional papers, it is about these issues we are dealing with today. Inequality to an extent that is unbearable for society. He has some sentence there in terms of chasing the royalty, the nobility away, being replaced by these owners of huge capitals. Coase, economist, was coming up with a very simple thing, saying property, enterprises are set as a means of controlling transaction cost. Usually in economics we are dealing with exchange and we just cut it off. In certain areas we are not dealing with exchange, we are not exchanging with others, but we are setting, if you want, a monopoly, where we can act without considering what actually the economies of scale would suggest. It's not about exchange, it is about controlling an area. And this is what Rose then said as well, where we are coming to this title of Comedy of Commons. It is about setting up an area where we are talking about rights. What are the rights people have? It's actually not so much about property as such, but what are the rights that are determined by this set of rules about property. And she says there is no such thing as a tragedy of commons. This was the link to the title she had. The tragedy of commons actually suggesting if something belongs to everybody, nobody takes care of it. Everybody looks individually for their own advantage. It's about sheep and the commons. Everybody sends as many sheep to this commons for the grazing as possible. Looking for the individual advantage and not for anything else. Tragedy of the commons because you ruin the commons. Rose says there's a comedy of commons because everybody will actually look to extend the rights to control these commons and to extend the use for everybody. And there we are coming, I won't be able to look in the details at the major players in this field of big data industries. What they are producing, and this is what we usually forget, no, what they are using is publicly produced goods. Goods, not commodities. We all produce data in our daily life. Does anybody have, even if you have your phone switched off, You are producing data, and everybody can control to some extent where you are, that you have switched off, and whatsoever. So we are producing in the public these data, but they are used privately. And these data we produce are so-called trust goods. We trust people that they are not abused. If we would really not have a certain amount of trust, at least, we would not buy a phone. We would not buy a computer with, at least with internet access. There is a certain trust around these goods, around these data we produce, and this trust is abused. Finally, economic categories, slightly reformulated. It's non-rivalry goods and non-excludable users. We cannot easily exclude somebody else to use these data if they are out there. And it is non-divisible use. If we use it, if you go to Facebook, this use is already something where you share something. Non-divisible, and there is the so-called scalability. As more as we use it, as higher is the outcome, but actually we don't have to invest more. Network effects. Some general issues on economic developments. What I said before, the firm, COS, transaction cost, one building with offices and production and whatsoever, it doesn't really exist anymore. There is a dissolution, happened over many years actually, that we don't have, not only in academia like here, we don't have a workplace as such, where we go from 9 to 5 to the office, to manufacture something or whatsoever. This is redefined at least. Of course, there are still these enterprises like Foxconn or whatsoever, like car manufacturers, but even there you find a dissolution of certain structures. It is about redefinition of work and labor. It's on the one hand, for many still, and for most of us still, we have to go to work, we have to have employment, but at the same time, there is Ronald Inglehart, the silent revolution, there is this, we want to get something more out of it. We want to get a certain satisfaction out of work. Wide field, and then we come to a strange thing in economics, at least for us. It is not about investing for profit. It is not about investing to establish an enterprise that is durable. Of course, it still is about making profit. It is still to exist on the market. But at the same time, we find many of these setups, new enterprises, they are made there to be sold. After a while, you have a great idea, and then you want to sell it. So there is a strange thing happening. You are not investing as well because you want to have this enterprise going. Who is investing? It's states. Much of it is state financed. It is large enterprises with venture capital and startups. It is the city of Munich as well, who invest in developing a certain kind of new ventures. And it is, of course, a complex of banks, the finance sector, and the state, as said, that are acting into this direction. It's as well something interesting in the report from the Monopolies Commission in Germany 2016. This 2016, they have two areas together. under the title Digital Markets. It's the sharing economy and fintechs, financial technologies. What we find is disembedded economy, and what we find is enterprises that are as well disembedded. And this is why I said Friedman actually is right. Businesses are there to make profit. They are not there to do good. And now they come up and say, well, actually, no, we have to do good. Corporate social responsibility. We have to show that we are not just looking for profit, but we are looking after the environment, we are looking after social issues, and then we have two sides of it. We profit actually from it. We have the better workforce because we are looking after them, like Krupp when they set up these estates for their workers. And we have a propagandistic side simply showing that we are good. Be good and talk about it. Sometimes split, and then we come with this background to at least three different ways of competition law. And I think competition law is increasingly, especially with these new developments, an issue as well for social law. The one is consumer price. That's especially in the United States an approach saying we have to secure that the consumer price goes down or is at least not increasing, and this is the main issue of competition law, of antitrust law. This is the aim of it. Whereas the European way says more, it is about free entry, it's about a structure, where we have people, enterprises, moving into business, moving out into business, being forced, being exposed to competition. And then we have a third strand. It is about publicness. It is about public spaces, where actually you have a huge responsibility for public institutions to secure not only free entry and exit, but as well where you have to guarantee publicness in terms of business interacting with each other. All discussions, volonté générale, volonté de tout et volonté particulière. How law can deal with it is of course a different and difficult story. But my point is looking at the tragedy of the commons, I think there is one. The network effect, so-called network effect, matters in terms of the lack of price elasticity. So you see the close link between economics and law. Price elasticity is usually supposed to be there that people go for a good that is not provided as by a monopoly. Now in these cases, of course, it was funny if you listen to Zuckerberg in Washington being asked if he considers to be a monopoly with Facebook. He said, it doesn't feel like it. I don't know if being a monopoly is about feeling. It is about the fact that actually, even if there are other networks, it is a monopoly. Which means as well the cost of not being part of it are relatively high. So the cost is not about monetary cost, but it is about a wider issue of what you pay if you are not part of this public. And it is something where we should be self-critical as well. It is about self-profiling. We set up our profiles on Facebook, on ResearchGate, on Academia Edu, on LinkedIn, wherever. We can, to some extent, manipulate it. And this is, I read an interesting article about this Anna Tsing, a conflation between super exploitation and self-exploitation. So we are still free entrepreneurs actually. We can do whatever we want, but the conditions under which we act are so harsh that we sit in the office long hours, that we make additional hours, that we actually don't go to the enterprise to work, but we are looking to present ourselves as being especially good and valuable for certain jobs. Because we don't have a contract for good or for a long time, but we have it for one project, for the gig. If you are good in one gig, go for the next one. And there are empirically these tendencies, and this is where you actually pay with your personal profile. Present yourself as good as you are, which means make yourself as good as you can be, which means work 24 hours, stay young, and have the experience of somebody who is already 80 or 140. 140 I say because that's the idea of Mr. Kurzweil and Bezos and others. So they want to extend life. At 140 they stop now. They want to have eternal life. The point is, we shape with all these social spaces. We do it now on platforms. And Mr. Norton, Peter D. Norton, wrote a book on fighting traffic, the dawn of the motor age in the American city. What happened there was very much what happens today as well. Shaping social spaces. It's not just having cars on some areas, in some spaces, but it happened the division as well. Here it is for pedestrians. Here it is for slow cars, here it is the motor highway. The entire social space is shaped by the idea of the car. Motorization. We can do it in a different way as well. Public transport. We are just on the best way to shut it down. We still have, of course, 4 hours now to Berlin, great thing, but at the same time we have this other trend. Vassili Leontiev looked earlier at the development of horses. And there you find exactly this point he makes. The horses, as working animals, ceased to exist. And one reason was that they didn't organize themselves. There was no trade union by the horses. And he says this was actually the reason that the entire technology changed. But it was not just the technology changing, but it was the interaction between actors, structures, technology, and the social setup. Only this interaction makes it actually possible and understandable what happens when we are talking about disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation, that's the term used today. And we have similar things. I posted there the good old railway ticket, which was just a regulation of certain access. Before it was negotiated, if you want, between individuals. You go to the railway, you buy a ticket, and then you have to look in a very complicated way what is the validity of this rail ticket. This was rationalized, and this was rationalized to an extent that we cannot deal with it anymore. So there we come to social responsibility, and there we come to law in immediate terms. Briefly, because this is then something to be explored as well in detail. Loss of criteria. I think in many cases when we talk about digital economy and changing the legal situation, there are two issues we easily forget. Books, The Plutocrats by Chrystia Freeland and by Emily Chung, Brotopia. Writing, it's more than bedside reading, it's very simple reading. The one is about plutocrats behaving without any criteria. They are just thinking the world is theirs. They don't know anybody else, and Emily Chen goes into details there when it comes to the question of women. Women in Silicon Valley don't exist. It's sexism, it is about behavior by people who actually don't know law, don't accept it, and simply breach every existing law. Singularity is near, coming to this, back to this title. Germany's Constitutional Court on the Census in 1983 is one point which we should consider as well when it comes to data scandals like Facebook. There is this point of these are public data, publicly collected and privately controlled. And this was exactly what happened in 1938, where they said you have the right, there is this right to protection, but at the same time we are living in a community, we are living in a state, and we have to accept that privacy has limits. So, Zero Marginal Cost Society, the second title, links to as well something of, I think in legal terms, had been discussed under titles like services of general interest. We cannot split, this is the experience, split services of general interest ad ultimo, have very small and in detail provision of something, and then we are getting lost and we lose control. I have some problems as well that's specifically to social law, this question of this triangular of contracts. Contracts between individuals, actually. There is no, in this model, there is no foreseen model of a controlling instance. So that's the public part where I think we have to look at in terms of law as well when it comes to data issues. And then we have, of course, the idealistic and optimistic company. I like to quote Mr. Zuckerberg, the good doers. And there we find many issues, and I quoted there one from Academia Edu, where actually it is so obvious that they use public monies to make private profits. They use our labor being paid by public bodies to set up this data platform, which of course is good for everybody in a way, but at the same time it does not acknowledge what we are really talking about in terms of public goods. Public goods being paid for by the public, being elaborated in the public, and I think there we should consider as well in all these areas more our own responsibility when it comes to these issues, to say this is how far we go, and this is where we have actually, with our work as academics, a certain responsibility, not just working for our own pleasure, but working for the public, and respecting as well the right of the public, to strengthen the right of the public to be in the loop, to be in control. Sorry, I lost control over time, and I'll stop here, but I think these are legal issues as well and economic issues where we have to come together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 5 minutes for discussion. Are there any questions? Lots of input.
Thank you for the lecture. I was wondering, I was reading a lot about CSR from a legal point of view, and there are those authors who argue that yes, CSR is used predominantly as a PR by some companies, but actually the more we use CSR policy, the more we put the bar high, and it actually stimulates, it actually makes companies to do it more and more. And there are companies, okay, I'm not referring to Nestle, who apparently are not in the game, but there are companies who, for instance, have introduced universal social security packages throughout all of their subsidiaries around the world without being forced by the law to do so. So can we see also the positive side of the CSR phenomena in this regard, towards greater regulation in the future?
Well, I think this is exactly the point, that by law we are not forced.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the law doesn't protect us from the abuse. And my problem with many discussions in this area is actually that the law tries to regulate certain things, certain access points, to set certain limitations. There is, for instance, taking this major thing now, breaking up Facebook, which I think is ridiculous. If you take Instagram out of it, Mr. Zuckerberg won't feel different. He still will say it doesn't feel like a monopoly, but it is still one. And this is always the problem I have with all these regulations. It is not enough to set limits, but you have to shift the agenda. And this will be then a protection as well. And I think you can go through different areas. It's being aware of this social effect. You can, of course, just comes to my mind, we have the car. There was recently this accident, tragic accident by this AI car. Yes, it is tragic, but it doesn't matter. There are so many accidents happening by normal cars every day. Nobody bothers. Because there we say actually, yes, we have clear rules. You had not been allowed to walk on the motor highway. So, your fault. And this will come there as well. You are not forced by law. In the extreme case, motor highway walking is a problem. But this is where, in shopping areas, you are not forced to it, but at the same time, there is no way, no alternative. Tina, there is no alternative. And I don't know, actually, this is my concern in the future, how law can find, in a way, a question, how law can find a way to go beyond regulation.
Economics, the idea that somebody is or should be used if it's, in German it's called Wohlfahrtsstiftend, so if there is some added value. Would you consider corporate social responsibility, not from a legal point of view, but from an economic point of view, as something which is Wohlfahrtsstiftend, which means does it better input to the economy, or is it from an economic point of view nonsense? Do I understand that point?
Well, I don't know. If I get you right, I would ask you, all of you, or us, if we can still work with this term of welfare, of Wohlfahrt. If the idea, I mentioned this triangularity, it is, in my understanding, always there to do something for somebody else. Be it individuals or groups. I have difficulties with it. On the one hand, of course, this is what we have to do. If we have a problem in cities like Munich with accommodation, homelessness, we have to look to find solutions. Coming to this point of new public concepts, we have resources enough. So it is not about talking about resources. We fade power questions out. We don't talk about power, but then we say, yes, be good, be better. And everybody should be better. There are concepts like the UBI, basic income, universal basic income. There are, I think, different ways. There is as well very old concepts actually on not the corporations but the cooperations, the cooperative sector, where I think this is as well trying to find ways of re-embedding when you don't have a question with welfare. With welfare, then that you don't have to provide something. There are concepts like prosumer and all this. Different questions and details, but I think this is where we have to think further. And where we actually, most of us, are in some ways in a privileged position actually, not living actually in these two worlds of yes, you have to go to work, 9-to-5 job, even if it's not 9-to-5, shift work and at the same time you want to have flexibility, which means you end up in gig work and in sharing economy. And then you depend actually on welfare.